I just prayed about it a lot and thought 30 years from now, do I want to be the person who stayed safe and had all this great comfort around me? Or do I want to be the person who swung for the fence, even if I was not going to win here? Because it was something that God called me to do that I knew was going to serve a deep human need.
Steve, thank you so much for joining Micah and I. We are looking forward to learning from you and from your life journey. And I've had the privilege of being on a small part of that journey and learned a lot already. Micah and I have this stream to capture stories of people whose lives are like the soil Jesus talked about that are producing 100-fold. Mm-hmm. And I love that he used a story to illustrate different kinds of soil, and some that are sort of caught up in the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches and don't produce the kind of return that he's looking for, or that even we as individuals are looking for. But then he goes on aspirationally to describe someone who hears the word, embraces it, even if it's costly and even if it's hard, and then lives it out. And it produces multiple times the blessing in other people's lives, both here in the U.S. and around the world. Mm-hmm. And your life represents that to us. And so, we wanted to talk for a few minutes about your journey so far. And then in the second episode, we'd like to talk about some of the wisdom you've garnered, some of those life hacks that you've learned that have made life rich and rewarding and ultimately productive. So, Micah, why don't you guide our conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Lloyd. Steve, great to have you today. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks.
If you can just start off and tell us about growing up and how you grew up affected kind of what you're doing today, or how that might have guided your path.
Yeah, well, I started in a very different place than I am right now. I grew up in Janesville, Wisconsin, blue collar town. It was a manufacturing town when I was growing up, still is to a degree. Grew up in a non-Christian family, and I became a believer through relatives when I was 12. I spent the summer with some relatives in Ohio. They were strong believers, and that's where I came to know Christ. I had two older brothers who were wild men, kind of living large, and two younger sisters. And so I would have followed right, in their footsteps. As a 12-year-old, I knew how to do a lot of things that surprised me now to think about. And I knew a lot about life that surprised me now to think about. But after I became a believer, it completely reshaped my future. I came home with a completely different mindset about who I was. My sense of self changed. My outlook on my future changed. I changed the people that I spent time with. And I opened up a phone book. It's sort of a funny story. I was just about to turn 13. I opened up a phone book and started looking at churches and dialing and calling up pastors and interviewing them about their church. Some of them didn't take well to it. One guy said, "You know what? Why don't you come? We'd love to have you visit. Why don't you come and see the church?" My trajectory was completely changed. And I feel like because of that, God protected me. God focused me on different things. And my life was completely changed as a result.
That's amazing. Tell us about your family now, how you met Molly and your kids.
Well, I met Molly at a church that's very well known now, Redeemer Presbyterian in New York, which was led by Tim Keller for many years. But I started, I think, about 9 months after it was a church plant. I think there were maybe a couple hundred people in the service by then. We were meeting in an old Seventh-day Adventist church. And then Molly started about a year later. So we started the church together when it was relatively small. Most people were single or newlyweds back then. And it was just a really rich period of growth for both of us, because we just grew so much under his teaching and under the various things that the church had going on. And so, and I'm extraordinarily blessed to be married to her. We have 5 children, all in their 20s. I've got 3 in graduate school right now. One's graduating med school in 6 weeks. One's graduating with a master's in teaching English in 6 weeks. One's actually at Duke Divinity School. One's in college, and one's in a finance role at a company in Washington. So they're all doing different things, all strong people of faith, for which I am deeply, deeply grateful. Yeah, it's just it's such a great stage in life to see what your children are becoming, just all the richness that they see in their own lives.
It's amazing. Well, jump into your career and tell us kind of how you got started after undergrad. Did you go straight into business or did you go straight to get your MBA? Tell us about your career a little bit.
Yeah, both. I went straight to get my MBA, but there was a bank in Chicago that said, if you come to work for us, we'll rotate you around the bank and we'll send you to business school. And you have to go to either Northwestern or Chicago. Those are the two schools that were part of the program. I was an undergrad at Northwestern, so I went to Chicago for business school. And during that period of time, I realized that I really loved finance. I was fascinated by the financial markets, kind of learning how companies operated and their strategies and mergers and acquisitions. And the whole thing was like this huge puzzle for me that drew me in, and I just loved it. And it wasn't long after business school that I moved to New York and went to work as an investment banker at Lehman Brothers. Finance really kind of played to my strengths and my interests. I was an international politics major, and I kind of loved knowing what was going on in the world. And especially after growing up in a small town in Wisconsin, kind of being part of the bigger world, just, felt there was sort of an endless opportunity to learn and understand. And I studied in Germany for a period of time, but I was also kind of a quant head, believe it or not, as a politics major. I took calculus and computers and graduate level stats classes. And so the weird thing about banking and finance was it was connected to this big world, but it was a fairly quantitative profession. So that was kind of why it worked really well for me. However, being as an investment banker in New York in the 1980s, which not everybody will understand, was a rough and tumble place. And, that's when people used to say things like greed is good. And I was really kind of finding my way as a Christian. This is kind of before I started attending Redeemer. I mean, I was a believer, but I was faced with a lot of complicated issues that I'd never been faced with before. And I realized I had to get my head around that. And so I very intentionally remember praying, promising God, I'm not going to make big decisions for money, power, or prestige. I will not do that, because I know I was in a business that at least was about money and prestige, and to an extent, power. And over time, right as I was about to get promoted to managing director, which is kind of the real golden ring, I really felt strongly that I was being called in a different direction. And I really felt like I wanted to grow into a different kind of leader than where banking was leading me, a bigger organizational leader, and be part of developing a company. And it was about the time I was getting married. And I also wanted to make sure that my profession didn't infringe upon my marriage unnecessarily. And I'd seen that in people that I worked with. So that's what I did. So I took a job in a financial role at one of the firm's clients. And over the years, I moved into a CFO role at another company that was sort of a large business and consumer services company. I was CFO, and then I moved into a large operational role. A number of years later, I found myself with a phenomenal job. I was the CEO successor in the succession line. We were doing very well financially, and we had just started a church plant. And I really felt God's leading to try to make a different kind of impact with my life. And it was sort of like everything was perfect. And I was in this place of great comfort and stability. And I just increasingly felt this need to take all of the learning and the gifts and the great blessings I'd had as I moved up the career path in terms of, how you develop as a leader and those types of things. And so we prayed about it. My wife prayed about it. It took us 2 years really until we landed on where God would take us. And that's when I went to Washington, and I was offered the opportunity to lead the Small Business Administration. That was a very compelling, but a very risky opportunity. It was a very compelling opportunity because many people don't realize, but the Small Business Administration is the arm of the federal government that makes loans to people who have lost their homes in a natural disaster. So a hurricane or a fire. If somebody doesn't have insurance to rebuild their home, the Small Business Administration is generally sort of the place that you go for a low interest loan to rebuild. This was almost a year after Hurricane Katrina, and almost nobody in the Gulf had received their small business loan because of operational challenges at the agency. And I was asked to come in into this very public failure. Congress was calling for my predecessor's resignation. It was a huge black eye for the administration, and there were 160,000 people in the Gulf who were unable to rebuild. And I'd never been a very public person. And so when this was presented to me, I kind of went through this thing where, like, do I really want to do this? Is this really what I'm like? Am I really am I willing to go to the public sphere? I talked to a lot of friends. I talked to other people in the kind of executive recruiting world, and people generally said, do not do this. This is not a good idea for you. You're like right in the right place in your career. And I just, prayed about it a lot and thought, on a personal level, 30 years from now, when I'm looking back at my career, do I want to be the person who stayed safe and had all this great comfort around me? Or do I want to be the person who swung for the fence, even if I was not going to win here? Because it was something that God called me to do, that I knew was going to serve a deep human need, and that I would get to use the skills and capabilities that I had developed over a career in a place that just mattered for so many people. And, I looked, there were a couple of passages of scripture for me at the time that were very impactful. There just was no question. Now, I'll tell you, it was because I went through a 2-year period of discernment that this possibility, my aperture was this big at the beginning, and it became this big by the time I was finished. And I may not have looked at the government in the first place, and I certainly wouldn't have gone toward this job in the first place. But I felt like God opened up the possibilities, opened up my heart, and helped me see the world and my life in a different way. So that was the big thing.
Steve, stop there for a sec, because doesn't that exactly line up with Jesus' explanation of the 100x soil? Is that these are people who heard the word, embraced it, and acted on it, right? So somehow you were listening carefully enough to get kind of pulled out of the vortex of comfort and success and high probability of just continuing to ramp it up. So go a little deeper. What were some of those thought processes in the back of your mind? Maybe in the middle of the night, you wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning and you think, what am I thinking? Why would I ever do this? And, and then what was the rebuttal, or how did you see your heart open to something that now you look back on, you can see God's fingerprints?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. One little tidbit that I didn't share was, when I was originally approached by the administration, it was not for this job. It was for a very interesting job that was sort of one step behind the big visibility type of job, where I would have, it was a really cool job. It was really interesting. I could have had a big impact. And I was really excited about it because it felt safer, but it also felt like an interesting step forward. And I was really excited about what I was going to be doing. And I had been through all the government vetting. And then 2 weeks before the public announcement, when my nomination was going to be announced, is when the White House came back and I got a call saying, we have a job that we think is a higher calling, and it's very important to the president, but you don't have to take it. And I felt like God had taken me to that point of saying, okay, we're looking at a federal government opportunity. This is a space that you care about. Now, are you really willing to go where I'm going to take you? And that was sort of like a bucket of cold water in the face to say, like, what am I really willing to do here? And I realized a couple of things. Number one, what I've learned over the years, many, many, many times over, is the scripture is so deep with instruction and encouragement. And there were a couple of passages of scriptures that were very, very meaningful for me. Number one is in Exodus 33, when Moses is looking at taking the Israelites, forward into the promised land. He has a conversation with God and he says, like, I'm going to be leading these people. And if I'm going to do this, I need you to go with me. I need you to teach me along the way. And he says, now show me your glory. And everything that Moses was doing in that spot was like, I'll do this, but I need you. I need you with me for all of these reasons. And then the other thing, there's a passage, I just love that passage in Hebrews 12:1, where it says, throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and run the race marked out for you with perseverance. I flipped some of the language around on that. And it's and right before that, in Hebrews 11, it goes through all of these pillars of faith in the Bible as this huge encouragement. And every one of them faced enormous difficulty in their lives to serve God. And so it's not easy. It's not hard to take a step back if you look in the scripture and say, oh my God, like these are the people we seek guidance from, or the stories we seek guidance from. These are the examples we have. And like, what is it really to give up? I'm not risking my life. I'm asked to do something that's going to impact a lot of people here. Yes, it's at great personal risk. Reputationally, I could fail. We're walking away from a lot of money. My kids are still little. That all kind of falls away when you feel like when you know you're being pulled into this plan that's bigger than you, and it's an eternal plan, right? God tells us we're called to an eternal purpose. And so those are the things that go through my mind. And the other thing is, you know what? I don't know how to find joy outside of his pathway. And I don't think there's joy in comfort. I don't think there's joy in convenience. And I don't think there's joy in a lot more money. I do think there's joy in feeling like you are living a life that's led by God's Spirit and going where he's taking you and serving in a way that you're called to do.
That's amazing. So tell us about your experience in Washington and then how you decided to transition from there.
We were unbelievably blessed during that period of time. Our mission at the SBA was very successful. Within 6 months, we had billions of dollars into people's hands, rebuilding their homes, rebuilding their businesses. So we were highly successful in repairing the issues and getting capital into that region. And the money that went into the region as a result were some of the most immediate, impactful development dollars that directly help people get their lives back. And I'll tell you, after having spent time down there, seeing the faces and talking to the individuals who needed the money, that was just unbelievably gratifying, in part because of the success we had at SBA. When the housing market was blowing up, I was asked to candidate for the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development role. And it was sort of ratcheting up. I mean, we were going into this sort of imploding financial crisis. Much of it was driven by issues in the housing market. And I felt like everything I had done in life, including the 2 years I had at SBA, had tooled me for that place now. Because in addition to financial skills and management skills and operational skills, I had learned how to lead in the federal context. I had learned how to engage with Congress, how to be a public figure and do media in the middle of a crisis, how to engage with a different kind of stakeholder. And so when that job came up, I sort of felt like I had been uniquely prepared for that job in that place. I'm not a typical HUD secretary. I don't have a background in poverty housing. I don't have a history in a lot of the HUD type of issues, but it was a mortgage crisis, right? And I was a former banker, CFO, and organizational leader. So for me, that was a natural place, and I sort of felt it had been prepared for me in a lot of ways. It was funny. I will tell you a story about my interview for the job, because I had to meet with a number of people in the White House, and the last person I had to meet with was the president. And he looked at me and said, "Why would you want this job?" And I said, "Well, sir, a lot of people thought I was crazy when I took the SBA job." And he said, "You were." And we had kind of a chuckle. And I said, "But that's why we're here. We're here to take these big challenges and these big messy roles, because what's better? What's better to take everything that you've been equipped with and deploy it for something that you believe really matters and that you believe you're called to do, and where you can see an impact on people's lives." And what I realized was he was less interested in my competencies at that time, because everybody else had interviewed me and they'd seen me in this prior role. He was a lot more concerned about my heart. and why I was leading and whether or not I was going to be the right kind of person on his team to do that. And for me, that was incredibly gratifying because in sort of a reverse way, I saw his heart and I saw what he cared about. And as a result, it was a very motivating moment. And I had many of those situations with him throughout the crisis.
That's amazing. So transitioning from there, how did you ultimately decide to go what you're doing now, which is running one of the biggest nonprofits in the world?
So I after the administration, I went back to the private sector. I ran two different companies, both of them were owned by private equity firms. And I felt a real need to get my family away from the spotlight. One of the things about those jobs, or particularly that job in the middle of a crisis, is there's a lot of media, and my world sort of consumed their world in ways that I wasn't comfortable with. So we kind of moved back to normalcy, where they jumped on school buses and, I had a local job and that type of thing. When I was a young single guy in New York, I spent my weekends working with kids in the city, kids from challenging backgrounds, tutoring, mentoring. One of them I actually had come to live with me. And when I got married, he stayed with us. And I really felt like I had a deepening understanding of the plight of people born into really difficult situations. And so fast forward 15 years as the housing secretary, I had visibility into what happened in those kids' lives when they didn't get off that track, when they ended up in homelessness or in public housing. And so during that period of time, I developed a strong burden for adults who are sort of outside of society, outside of opportunity, looking in without a pathway to get in to a different trajectory in their lives. So when I was back in the private sector, I began spending a lot more of my volunteer time, my philanthropic efforts, working with organizations that helped adults through training and development, job placement programs, entrepreneurship programs that help them get on a different path forward and move past many of the barriers they have in life. And then I decided, you know what, I want to do this full time. And that's the time that I actually went to the Halftime Institute. And one of the things that we did in our very first cohort meeting was we wrote a personal mission statement, sort of as a, if you had to do this now, what would you write? And that mission statement I wrote on that day was the mission statement I stuck with. And it was something like, to help people who are difficult to employ find meaningful employment so that they can take care of themselves, their families, and find a better future. And so I began looking for that opportunity. And I won't get into all the ways that I did that, but along that journey, I got a call from a recruiter to run the Goodwill Industries International. And I said, I don't think I want to do that, right? I was thinking of the retail network and wasn't really interested and kind of hung up the phone, goodbye. And a couple of weeks later, the senior recruiter called me back and said, I think this is probably what you want to do. You really need to look at this harder. And I came to learn that Goodwill is the largest provider of workforce training and development and job placement on the continent in the nonprofit world. I mean, this has been our mission for 120 years. Our founder built this organization to give people who are poor opportunities for jobs, to take care of their families, to learn, and to move forward in life towards self-sufficiency. And so it was one of these moments where it was like, oh my gosh, like I almost missed this thing. And this is exactly what I want to do. The other aspect of the job is I run kind of the umbrella organization, but there are 155 independent local organizations that directly run the stores and the mission centers, the job training centers, and that type of thing. And so it was actually like this big business opportunity, which is what I love doing. I mean, I love the business challenges at the same time that it is delivering the mission that God had put on my heart years before. So that's how I ended up here.
And Steve, one of the things I remember you saying when we were right in the mix of that sort of deciding about, was it World Vision or was it Goodwill or whatever, was that you're drawn to large, complex organizations.
Yes.
And the complexity is what just excites you. And I could read that in your body language at the time. And it's something that was small, medium, or startup was not going to do it. And there's not that many organizations with 110,000 employees serving the poor, right? So, I mean, it's like looking for a needle in the haystack. So now that you're deep into it, I mean, you took this before COVID. So then you had, oh my gosh, what do I do with all these employees? How are we going to serve them? And then reinventing a model that is a confederacy of all these different individual organizations. And that's a lot of you got what you asked for. Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of complexity. The confederacy model, or we call it the federated model in the nonprofit sector, was already in place. What I found was we had this large, complex network of organizations collectively with over $7.5 billion in revenue, over 120,000 employees, serving 2 million people a year. And we're the service organization to that large network, and our goal is to help them be more effective in their local markets by designing products and services and supports that meet them locally and help them be able to deliver their mission in their store management more effectively. So it was this great opportunity to look at all the complexity that they have in their model, and then look at it on an international basis and say, how can we work with this massive network, with all of its complexity, and work with them to drive effectiveness locally by the support we give them. And so, we underwent a lengthy process of strategy development. We brought those 155 organizations together in small groups and kind of built that from the bottom up. COVID hit. We went into triage mode. We had to cut half of our staff. But when we built it back, we rebuilt it to be able to achieve this strategy, which required a lot more technology talent, learning and development talent, a lot of other things. And now we're 2 years into rolling out the 3-year strategic plan, and it's just been thrilling to be at this point and to see the impact that transformation is beginning to have.
Steve, I'm curious, has the running Goodwill kind of met your expectations? Like, do you feel like you're where you're supposed to be right now?
Yeah, it's been, in a lot of ways, in some ways, it's been the most challenging job I've ever had. In some ways, it's also required me to kind of operate on more cylinders because of the complexity of the role. And there's a very local component to it, but there's also a very visible public component to it. It's probably the first time I've ever been in a situation where I've really taken an organization down to the studs and been part of rebuilding it into a different kind of organization. I've done some of that in the companies I've led, but it's been more sort of strategic lifts, refocusing here or there. So it's been really exciting. I'll say we've been very fortunate in being able to recruit a terrific team of people who, in many cases wanted to do something different in their lives. But yeah, it's been thrilling. It's been challenging. People who listen to podcasts like these things hear people talking about their life in very kind of convenient and packaged ways. There's been a lot of dark moments along the way, I just have to say. But as I look back over the last 4 years, I'm just thrilled to be where we are right now, and very grateful, both for where we've come, but also grateful for the opportunities that I see in the future for us.
And Steve, as we wrap up this first section, for those listening that really long to spend their life or invest their life as the soil that produced 100-fold, you look back, you can see, and I can hear God's fingerprints in each of these layers, right, of your story. And now, visualize for us in the coming years the impact that Goodwill is going to have with this renewed vision and strategy in millions of people's lives. What encouragement do you have for somebody that really is longing to be on that same journey of multiplied impact? How does that feel, and what have you learned that could be a guide to them?
Well, one thing that's sort of been the hallmark of my life is I've made big moves and big changes, and with that comes big disruption. And so that is not for everybody. And so I just want to start with a note of caution to say my journey might be very, very, very different than somebody else, because God might be leading people to stay where they are and rethink their lives. So I think square one is I think people need to be able to look at where they are today and really feel like they're having the impact with what's in front of them and what's happening around them. And there may be tremendous opportunities that are a lot closer to home, whether it's being a great leader in a corporate organization that really drives a different kind of employee culture, that drives a different kind of product culture, and where as a leader, you are representative of something vastly different than what they might find in another organization. And so people should never underestimate that. And to take those same skills, to take your economic wealth and deploy it to help other organizations as a board level, as a volunteer. So there are a lot of ways to do this. And I think it's important to say, what is God calling me to do? What are the pathways that I think are available to me? And am I really thinking about the life I have now in a way that is as rich as I could? Or do I really need to be doing something different? With all of those cautions in place, I will never forget having read a study of octogenarians who were looking back at their lives, and they were asked, what do you regret? And there are two things that I remember because they stuck with me so much. Number one is they said, I wish I'd invested more in relationships. And the second one was, I wish I'd taken more risks. Now, my wife said, we've got the risks covered. Can we work on the relationships? But so it's not a one size fits all. I often look at the people who've been in one place for 40 years and have been part of an organization and have this phenomenal legacy and are pillars in their community, and say, wow, they really did that right. And that's a very different path than I did, because I ended up moving to a number of different places as I felt called to those opportunities.
That's amazing. Well, Steve, thank you so much. This has been so insightful. Thank you so much for telling us all about your story. And we'll wrap this up. And then in the next episode, we'll just ask for very practical advice and direct questions, and ask for your wisdom in that. So thanks so much.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the 100X podcast. Please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast service. We would greatly appreciate it if you could rate the show and leave us a review. This podcast is sponsored by Anchor Investments, whose mission is to build America's most generous real estate company. To learn more, please visit anchorinv.com.